There are times in life when one careless step can lead to irreparable consequences. That's exactly what happened to a wife who accidentally sent her husband a spicy message meant for her lover. What happened next? Today, we will tell you the real stories of how such mistakes became the cause of treason and revenge for treason. Mikhail and Larissa had been married for 4 years. The woman spent the last couple of years trying hard to find her calling. She took various courses and jumped from one job to another. When her husband told her to calm down and stay at home, or better yet to think about having children, she refused and said that his income for the expansion of the family just not enough. And in general, she was not a homebody, and she didn't really want to have children right now. It was better to live for herself, and it would be good to get back on her feet. With all this rush with various courses and jobs, Larissa began to deny her husband in intimacy more often. Mikhail even began to worry that it was about him. After all, family life was relaxing. He was no longer in the same shape as when they met. He gently asked his wife about the reasons for these refusals. She put it down to fatigue and malaise. The husband sympathized with his wife and was less likely to pester her. Only then she began to withdraw and in everyday communication. Getting a new job, she was mentally almost constantly deep in it. But Larissa herself would have been happy to be distracted from work, but the last few weeks she kept getting calls from the same number. A certain gene popped up on her smartphone screen even late at night. "Who is it?" her spouse asked. "Yes, a new client from work calls all the time, wants special treatment. I just ignore her after hours." "I do not want to provoke a conflict," said Larissa. "Let me talk to this gene, explain, and the rules of decency," the husband grinned. No, they have every customer there. Let it be better that way." "Concerned," replied Larissa. Usually she dropped those calls, wrote something in follow-up, and then put the phone on airplane mode. That's how they lived under the calls on the annoying customer. One day, an old friend of Mikhail's called him in the middle of the week and invited him to his dacha for the weekend. To sit with other comrades, go to the baths, steam, and drink in a man's company. Mikhail was not a big drinker, but they rarely saw each other in such large company. After all, everyone had families and jobs. And here everyone could and would go, it was a sin to refuse. He knew his wife did not approve of such weekend get-togethers. But this time, she was suspiciously easy to let her husband go to this event. She reacted very calmly to the news. It even seemed to her husband that she was overjoyed. He suspected something wrong. And by Friday evening, the same client started calling again. It was a strange coincidence. And Mikhail came up with a plan. He waited for his wife to leave her phone and retire to another room. While she did not see, he quickly opened the phone book and changed the number of this woman to his. He left her name too. Now, if the wife decides to contact this suspicious customer herself, the message will be sent to her husband. Saturday came. The husband prepared to leave and slowly packed his things. From time to time, glancing at his wife. She was sitting in the kitchen going through spices, trying to hide her impatience. "What will you do this weekend?" "I'll stay home." "Tired at work this week?" Lazily she answered. "And you have a good rest," she added, as if hurrying her husband. The things were packed. Mikhail said goodbye to Larissa and followed Alexei, his friend, to go to the dacha together. It took literally half an hour before they stopped at the grocery store and loaded up. And already on the way out of town, Mikhail receives a text message. "Sweetie, mine has left. I'm waiting for you. Let's do it this time without Vadik." Everything fell down inside the husband. He had already prepared mentally for one lover of his wife, but he could not handle two. "So you live for yourself," the husband thought. He showed a text message to his friend. "Well, Leka, you're not Vadik, but that's your destiny. You will come with me to my wife." Mikhail said to his friend and turned sharply back to the house. When the men drove up to the house and went up to the apartment, Larissa was already waiting for her lover. Except that when her husband crossed the threshold, and not just one, the woman's enthusiasm noticeably waned. She grabbed the towels and began to cover with them quite frank lingerie on herself. "And what are you, dear Larissa, covering yourself? You wrote Nabavatic, so it's Lesha. You do not remember friends at all," bitterly said her husband. "Misha, what is going on here?" said the wife in a panic. "Exposing the cuckold, that is me. But you better ask what happens next." "Will not stop, Michael," but after the silence of his wife answered himself. "Your move is about to happen." He shouted, and in his street shoes went deep into the bedroom in search of a suitcase. Alexei shook his head and went outside for a smoke, and Mikhail threw his unfaithful wife's things, showing her that she had to pack here and now. She tried to explain something else, but her husband just dropped everything, caught the time, and followed his friend out into the street. They stood in front of the car and watched the force of Larissa flitting through the windows of the matrimonial bedroom. After about 10 minutes, she was already out of the entrance and handed Mikhail the keys to the apartment, then quickly disappeared behind the houses in search of a cab. "Aren't you going to watch to see who she's going to be swooping in with her things now?" asked his friend. "What for? It is unlikely that he himself will be happy about such a surprise in the form of a refugee." The man grinned, and everything came out just as Mikhail said. The wife rushed to her lover, only he did not expect such a quick action from a married lady. He had made himself comfortable. She, with her husband, no need to support her, and no need to make her comfortable. So when she appeared on his doorstep, he mumbled some nonsense about the fact that there was no way he could not see her now. Larissa realized then that she was not much of a lover in her situation. She had to go to her parents, even though it looked rather shameful at her age. To her parents' legitimate questions, she answered that she and her husband just had a fight, until Mikhail himself decided to tell them everything in detail. After that, all questions to him disappeared, and Mikhail himself still went to the country house that day to celebrate his upcoming joyful divorce with his friends. Second story. I thought everything was going well, but one day I accidentally found out the truth about what was going on behind my back. Stories of cheating and revenge that blew up my life. Ludmila and Alexei had been married for 5 years, both in their early 30s. They hadn't had children yet, neither of them really wanted to. Even though Lucia hadn't worked in the usual sense of the word for a long time, she still couldn't imagine herself locked up at home. Now she lived her life to her satisfaction, meeting with friends and relaxing a lot. From time to time, she took some orders for graphic design via the internet, but the main breadwinner was of course her husband. Alexei worked in a real estate agency and during successful seasons made more than enough money. He was a rather conservative man who did not particularly like surprises. He liked it when everything in life was predictable and under control. However, one day an incident happened to him that showed him the difference between just unexpected surprises and really bad ones. Alexei had a close friend whose name was Mikhail. He often saw his friend, and at one point, Lesha began to notice a change in his mood. He became very cheerful and smiling, and Alexei realized that he had got another passion. Misha had long been married, but with his wife, they had a rather complicated relationship. She was the daughter of rich parents, and it cost his friend a lot of trouble to win her favor. All this was done out of sheer calculation. His wife's influential parents had entrusted him with the management of a family business, and now he was living the high life, enjoying the rich life. But he did not really love his wife, so he secretly dated girls who attracted him. He had been seeing his last mistress for a long time, but now he could clearly see that another adventure was upon him. He was very lively and pleased with himself. Lesha never showed any interest in who he was meeting with, and Misha himself always hid from his friend and his wife as a precaution. If she found out about his affairs, he would be in trouble. And this time, Lesha also had no desire to know the details. But life is a complicated thing, and he learned them completely by accident. One day Alexei was at work, and he had to meet a client in a cafe. Usually he made appointments at a cafe near the office, but this time the client made the appointment himself, and it was very far away. The man left early so he wouldn't be late. When he arrived at his destination, he chose a quiet place in the room so that he and the customer would be less noticed and waited. He sat and looked out the window, watching for passersby. Then he saw a familiar car pull up to the parking lot. It was Misha's car. He got out of the driver's seat and went to open the front passenger door. Lesha immediately knew that his mistress was sitting there, because his friend was smiling and lost his hands before he opened the door. Alexei knew that Misha's wife was now out of town on business, so only his new passe could sit there. Lesha moved a little closer to the window to get a better look at the girl. Misha opened the door and held out his hand. A woman's hand in a leather glove appeared, and then his Lyudmila emerged from the car. Alexei was in a stupor. At first he didn't understand why his friend was driving his wife here. But all his questions evaporated when Misha embraced Lucia and kissed her on the lips. The woman responded to the kiss for a few seconds and then pulled away, looking around. She was afraid of being seen, but it had already happened. The husband had already seen everything he needed to see. Of course, the man was mortified. It seemed to him that nothing in their married life indicated adultery. Everything was as usual, no quarrels or scandals. It seemed to him that they had a perfect understanding, but apparently his wife was good at pretending. Lesha thought they would go into a cafe, but they went the other way. And his husband remained seated in his seat, digesting everything he had just seen. The meeting with the client went strained because the man couldn't concentrate. As he drove back to work, he thought hard about what he wanted to do. He wanted to have a showdown with both his wife and his friend, but then he decided to surprise them. Let them lose control of the situation now, because they obviously wouldn't expect such a surprise. Alexei didn't come up with some elaborate way to place them, but he knew Lucy and Misha's weaknesses and decided to use that. The fact is that the friend was in his wife's family on bird rights. If they found out there that he was walking around on the side, he would be kicked out and disgraced and forever. But in that case, there would have to be hard evidence, because no one would believe it. His wife and her parents are quite modern people. They have been in business for a long time and know that competitors can devise any intrigues for their own purposes. Alexei realized that he definitely needed to film everything that was going on. But how could he do that if he didn't know where they were meeting and when? And then the man decided to rely on luck, but at the same time to create all the conditions to make his plan come true. He bought hidden cameras, installed them in his home in the bedroom and living room so they could not be seen by outsiders. He took some time off from work and told his wife that he was going to work in another city for a week. He hoped that he and Misha would spend time at their house and he could get the cherished proof of infidelity. His wife reacted positively to the news of his spouse's departure, and he was encouraged by it. He hoped that his plan would succeed. On the appointed day, he left home with a suitcase. The man decided not to stay in the city, but to really go away to rest and gather his thoughts. He went to the recreation center to spend time to his advantage. All week his wife hardly called him. He did not pester her with calls, hoping that he and Misha would meet at least once in their wife's apartment. A week later, Alexei returned home. Lucia was in great spirits. Apparently, she too had spent her time benefiting her own body, and Misha was her assistant in this. Alexei waited until he was alone and began to watch the camera footage. Almost her man was let down. Misha had indeed come to their house, and more than once. Her husband did not watch the entire tape, just rewound some of it. On the whole, it was clear from the footage. The man was gloating. He got the evidence he needed to pay back his former best friend and his unfaithful wife. Alexei was acquainted with the father of Mikhail's wife and with herself. They had consulted with him a couple of times about commercial real estate. He still had contacts, so Lesha sent a copy of the camera footage and his father-in-law Misha and his wife. He also left a copy for himself to give to Luca. The scandal broke out the next day. His wife's phone rang. She saw the incoming number and visibly tensed up. She didn't feel comfortable talking to this caller in front of her husband, but curiosity overcame her and she answered. She was silent for a couple of minutes, and then she turned pale and looked at her husband. At that moment, Lesha realized that it was definitely Misha who had called and told her that her husband knew about their connection. The woman hung up without taking her eyes off Alexei. He, in turn, felt wild delight that he could finally knock his imperturbable cheating wife out of the equilibrium. Lyusia began to sob. She tried to put all the blame on Misha. She said that he forced her to sleep with him, that he was a tough, cunning man. She said all this very convincingly, and Alexei might even have believed it, because she was crying and looking at him very sincerely. But the woman was unaware of one very important detail of the whole situation. Blaming her fault on his friend, she had no idea that her husband had seen them together, and she didn't look like she was being forced to be around him. Lyosha told her this, and she immediately changed her face. It was immediately clear from her running eyes that she was trying to come up with a new version of what was going on, but nothing came to mind, and she just kept sobbing in hopelessness. Then Alexei began to call Misha. The man answered the phone, but did not listen to anything. He simply asked where such a despicable man got the conscience to try to explain his terrible act. Mikhail was unable to answer anything. Further events unfolded as if on a rolling basis. Misha began to have real problems with his wife and her relatives, and accordingly with a permanent job. After the revelation of his act, she threw him out of the house with only his suitcase. He came to his wife for several days and lay at her feet so that she forgave him, but the woman was adamant. Ludmila, the deceived husband, did not kick her out so harshly at first, but he made it clear to her to look for a place to live as soon as possible. Lyusha was not going to give her a penny. Lyusia constantly cried and begged her husband's forgiveness. She said it would never happen again. Sabin complained that it wasn't her fault, and the whole situation was Misha's fault. Another batch of lies was the very last straw. Lyosha's patience was not iron, and then he kicked her out by force. The couple divorced. Luzia moved into a rented apartment, and Alexei no longer cared about her fate. It seems that at first she was going to go to her mother, but then the two lonely people met, and Misha started to live together with Lyudmila. Thus, another personal hell began for the woman. She could no longer walk through life with the same ease. She had to work for two, because Misha turned out to be quite a gigolo. At first he decided to just take a break after such a shock, and when he started looking for a job, he realized that his ex-wife's family had helped him out, and now Michael was not the most desirable employee anywhere. According to mutual acquaintances, the newfound roommates argued for a long time and eventually parted ways. Both were exhausted and resentful of the way their lives were going, and in this Alexei saw the ultimate justice. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.